Well, we'll see if we can get that. That's so exciting. We'll see if we can get people back in the room and get started here. Before our panel discussion gets back, we're going to kick off the session with a couple ARS questions. So this is for state government only, so I think the 10 of them that are in the room. No, I'm kidding. So if the state government people would please grab your keypads. And the question is, will your next IT budget grow or shrink, and by how much? A, increase, B, flat, C, reduce by 10%, D, reduce by 20%, E, what budget? Wow, flat budgets. I think that's what they call the new normal. I know that's what I hear in my state a lot. So, the next question is also for states only. Are budget cuts forcing you to push back standard refresh cycles? A, yes, I am not refreshing at 5 to 7 years. I think that should be I'm now refreshing at 5 to 7 years instead of 2 to 4 years. B, no, my refresh cycle is the same. Or C, yes, but it is unclear how long the new cycle will be. Oh, good. Well, refresh cycles are about the same. That's nice to see. Our next session will shed some light on the federal CIO process improvements through technology and efforts that states can adapt to or partner with. Dan Chinook, the Executive Director of IBM Center for the Business of Government, will be facilitating this panel. Dan oversees all of the center's activities in connecting research to practice to benefit government and has a special focus on technology, regulation, budget, and acquisition issues. Dan's been associated with NASCIO for quite a few years, so would you please help me in welcoming Dan and the panel to the stage. Dan, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everybody, and if it's all right with you, I'll just do the introductions from here to make it more familiar. We're hoping to have a conversation. It is indeed a great pleasure to be back here at NASCIO. I've enjoyed interacting with NASCIO since, I believe it was about 15 years ago when I was at the Office of Management and Budget here in Washington. At the time, I was the head of Information Technology Policy and Budget, and all the work that OMB did working with CIOs in that environment. And when NASCIO would come in, we would meet with NASCIO sort of in those early conversations. And I remember my first meeting and hearing all kinds of information about how OMB circulars were forcing state CIOs, this was in 1999, to keep track and wasteful spending and keep track of how many computers people had to have at their desk because they had to have a different computer for each program. And I know we've solved that problem today. But we do know that technology, and this is the subject of our panel, has evolved significantly, really over the last 15 and especially almost exponentially over the last several years. And it is our jobs, both those of us that have been in CIOs or the equivalent roles, those of us that are doing so now, and those of us who are here who are supporting CIOs as stakeholders and as industry partners, to help understand how to leverage these technology trends and enable them to make agencies, partners, the citizens that agencies serve, small businesses, and even other governments work more effectively and efficiently. And really, that's the subject of today's panel, and we are very fortunate to have four leaders who have great experience in both government and industry with these types of questions, who are really doing some fascinating things in and with agencies at the federal level, and in many cases working with you and your states and counterparts in implementing these technology programs to deliver services to citizens more effectively and efficiently. So I'm going to introduce the panel, and then I'll have a couple of questions for them. And then, as I said, really we want this to be an open conversation. I do have more questions, but I'll only use them if you are not reticent, or rather if you are reticent. and we'll hope to have a good interactive exchange. So let me go to introducing first. To my left, Margie Graves. Margie is the acting Chief Information Officer and the Deputy Chief Information Officer at the Department of Homeland Security. Margie has a long tenure at DHS, having served as a leader in various information technology positions in the CIO office, and was part of the stand-up of the CIO office at DHS some 10 years ago, a process that I was involved in as well. So it's always a pleasure to work with Margie in this and any capacity. To Margie's left is Mike Wash. Mike is the Chief Information Officer at the National Archives and Records Administration, where he came from the Government Printing Office, and also has a career in industry. And NARA really is, in many ways, sort of at the nexus of so much of the government's information apparatus. We often talk about the IT challenge of the CIO, and we talk also about sort of information and how the government collects and exchanges information. And it's really only in the last couple of years that the nexus between those two, social media, analytics, has created such power in how information is used, accessed, and stored. And Mike and also Chuck Riddle, our next speaker, really are the center of how the federal government is dealing with that. So let me move to Chuck, who is the Chief Information Officer at the Government Printing Office, an agency with a name that sounds like it's in the 20th and possibly even the 19th century, but is at the very forefront of how the government is moving in and has moved in to the 21st century. For example, all of the, or many of the cards, the HSPD 12 cards that many federal government employees have, as well as some of our counterparts, are actually produced and created, and the innovation around that is done at GPO in various different labs. They do many functions and facets of technology transfer and exchange across the agencies, work with the Congress to do things like create an XML platform for the writing of all legislation. Imagine an attorney in the Congress who actually uses XML to write legislation. Well, a lot of that is because of the work of Chuck and his colleagues at GPO. And then finally, Kathy Conrad. Kathy is the Deputy Associate Administrator, is that of Citizen Services and Information Technology at the General Services Administration. And most of you know GSA. They are essentially a federal government-wide service organization that does lots of different activities, lots of different business lines, from buildings and fleet management and acquisition management. Kathy's office is really the vanguard of a lot of what the government does across not only GSA's business lines, but working with the CIOs in a lot of different areas, including cybersecurity. Kathy's office runs the FedRAMP program, which is the interoperability approval program for agencies as they certify the security of different systems, and lots of different innovations involving the web and social media. And Kathy also has great interaction with states in her role as well. So as you see, we have a great range of experience in the government and also drawing on their years in industry, working with the states, and we'll look forward to a terrific session with them. So I just wanted to start off and go down the line with a first question to give the panel a chance to let you know what their thinking is on this question. What are some of the major technology trends that you're dealing with in your agencies with the citizens and businesses and other government entities that you serve that are affecting how government does its business over the next several years? And even more importantly for this audience, how can CIOs step up and work with agencies to deliver these technologies more effectively and efficiently to lead to real results? Margie, why don't I start with you and we'll go down the line.
Okay, thank you, Dan. I'd really like to start with the area of mobility. We live in a mobile world. Everything gets done in the mobile world today. We are working across the federal government under the auspices of the digital government strategy to make mobility not only the wave of the future, but also to make sure that it's done in a secure fashion. So one of the areas that we're addressing, DHS, DOD, NIST, and others, is establishing a mobile security baseline, which really takes the NIST controls and lays them out in a very cogent fashion so that people who are working in program offices in states in other areas can adopt those controls and move forward. And we're doing that in several instances using different use cases. If you can think about the myriad of mission spaces that we have within DHS, all the way from FEMA, working with first responders, and responding to natural disasters, all the way up to law enforcement and intel. These are all different use cases, and they require different security paradigms. So within that structure, we're developing these individual use cases, and we're saying to, in this playbook that we're developing, which is supposed to be published in May, what are the key factors that would apply to this use case, and how would you actually kick the tires, go out and implement, and work with industry to pull forward those solutions that would meet those security paradigms. We will be working in the mobile world all the way into the future. This is the technology that we're dealing with today. The second aspect is probably cloud computing. We're moving from CapEx to OpEx. It's not just being driven by budgets, though certainly that is a major driver. It's also being driven by efficiencies and requirements and the ability to share information. These kinds of technologies are coming to the fore because they just make sense. The ability to be able to move work packages between different vendors, the ability to be able to develop your own services within your private cloud, all of those are pieces of the portfolio that we're going to use to deliver our mission. And we're working very closely, and I'm sure Kathy will talk about FedRAMP, defining what those clouds look like and how they will operate, and not just the requirements and the technology and the security aspect of it, but also the business models. All of those have to change. We have to get vendors to work together across the supply chain to supply those end-to-end solutions. And it's very important that we take that business model and try to address it, because right now, working the way we do acquisitions in the federal government, and I'm sure the states have the same kinds of issues, there are certain ways we buy things. Those are probably going to have to change, particularly in the licensing arena. We're going to be looking more at end-to-end services. So those are just two aspects.
Great. Mike?
Thanks, Dan. At the National Archives, one of the technological challenges that we face is scale. When you think about the archives, even at the state level, and I've done a lot of work with state governments and the state archives and the libraries, the problems are really very similar, and it's about how to deal with the scale. How do you accommodate the large volumes of information? But for National Archives, one of our missions is to make records accessible. That is one of the key aspects of what we are expected to do. We currently have about 18 million records available online, and within the next 5 years, the expectation is for that to grow to over 500 million. And for us to be able to accommodate that type of scale, we need to use some of the technologies that were just discussed, and we need to use the cloud for an elastic type of environment in order to provide the type of end user experience that is really expected. Easy access, quick availability, even in high availability times. On the other end of it, the scale of being able to accept records into the archives up until now, essentially most records have been in an analog form, but more and more they're moving into an only electronic form and a born digital form. And if you look at the presidential directive on records management, the expectation is that by the end of this decade, all records will be processed electronically in the federal government. That's a huge shift in being able to create systems that would be able to accept those records in from all the federal agencies and all the various forms that they will come, and then move them through the archival process so that they can be accessible when the record schedules indicate that they can. But the interesting thing about archives, that it's just one of these fascinating little facts in our world of IT and technology, and we talk about the life cycle or the life cycle of even a format or an application. When you talk about an archive, many times the archival record that you're going to start to move into an archive is already 25 or 30 years old. So there's already been multiple lifetimes of either the media that it was stored on, the format that it was created in, the application that it was used to develop it. So being able to manage these records through those life cycles to get into an archival records management process in an electronic form starts with the agencies and working with them to be able to start the preservation process from the beginning. It's more important now than ever before. Paper documents or films or pictures have that length of longevity naturally most of the time. But electronic records, not so much. So that's one of our key challenges.
Great. Chuck?
Sure. You know, you mentioned that the government printing office is sort of an outdated concept. I think in a lot of ways we should change our name to the government publishing office, because so much of the work that we do has to do with taking data, mostly from Congress, but from a lot of different sources, and putting it into a format that can be shared. So our mission hasn't changed so much as how we do our mission has changed, that the formats that we put information onto is going from printed material to electronic material. And Mike can probably tell you more about our flagship application, FDSys, than I can, because he helped to really create that. But it's an online repository of government information, all of the bills, all of the things that the legislative branch produces, as well as the executive branch agencies. FDSys is a place to store those securely, authenticate that they are what they say they are, that they're valid documents that have followed a chain of custody. And we make that available for agencies so they don't have to do it themselves anymore. And that applies to information on websites. We work closely with the Federal Depository Library Program to take information that is out there and give it a place to stay, sort of working in tandem with NARA, but from a slightly different perspective. So it's interesting to watch how technology can be both sort of a disruption and a benefit at the same time. I think that the pace of change is happening so fast that you know, our customers out there, whether it's the business stakeholders or the American public, they demand things. They're expecting us to move quick. And I think the things that have been mentioned so far with respect to mobility, with broadband access, being able to do things faster are huge. I think that's where CIOs really need to figure out, what do we need to be doing ourselves, and what things could we take a step back from that are maybe commodity IT, and pass those things to other service providers so we can focus on what we do best, because we can't keep up with it all. And gone are the days of being able to control everything yourself. If you don't stay up with the pace of change and deliver services to your customers, they're going to find a way to do it whether you help them or not. And you pretty much have to speed up or get out of the way. And thinking that you can control it all is long gone. That's not going to happen anymore. So you have to really act more as a service broker than just a central clearinghouse to be the authority on all things IT. That's not going to happen anymore. So I think cloud, mobility, being flexible and able to move quickly are all keys that we all, the folks sitting up here and you out there, have to really think a lot about.
Thanks, Chuck. Kathy?
So I would agree with everything that my colleagues have said, and would add to that, and particularly build on Chuck's point, that in addition to being able to keep pace with change, I think we're also we're moving very quickly into a world of shared solutions and shared services. Gone are the day where people can say, oh, I didn't invent it, it's not invented here, I don't want to use it. We've really moved toward who has already done this, and how can I leverage it and reinvest those resources in another area where there's not an existing solution or where I've got a specific customer need. To really do that and use shared services and solutions effectively, one of the things that we've found that all of us need to do a little differently is governance. So I would say governance is an area where we're really trying to figure out, how do you manage shared services effectively and do so in a manner that takes into account customer needs and is leverageable across the many parties who may be involved in sharing a service either within an agency or across agencies. As Margie mentioned, we're all at the federal level involved in implementing the digital government strategy, and every agency is in the process of not only developing ways to take advantage of the really wonderful solutions that are being developed under the strategy, the mobile work that Margie and her colleagues are doing on the security architecture. We're developing a mobile application development program that I think will offer some resources that all of you can tap in and leverage. in doing that, we have to think through who are the customers, who are business owners, who is responsible for what roles, and how do we all participate in a way that is effective and efficient. In addition, I think another area where we're really focusing is on unlocking data and content. And I think both of you mentioned that a little bit. We're finding, and I can talk a little more later about data.gov, but we've really found that over the last couple of years, we've made tremendous strides in opening up government and enhancing transparency. To get to the next level, we really are focusing on impact. To achieve impact, data has to be open, it has to be accessible to you, to citizens, to developers and entrepreneurs who are eager to develop new apps to take advantage of the mobile world that Margie recognized. And you'll see a lot of changes coming around in the next couple of months in how agencies make data not only accessible, but useful. So it's one thing to be able to have access to a lot of data, but it's another thing for it to be in a machine-readable, human-readable format with visible context, so it's clear how somebody who's much smarter and more creative than any of us in government might be about how you could potentially use it. And then finally, with cloud, the other thing I'd like to start us talking a little bit about is, so we need to be more agile, we need to be able to provision services very flexibly, very rapidly, and in order to do that, we need new business models. And so we're looking at things like a cloud broker that would enable us to come up with the models that would allow us to acquire cloud services quickly and flexibly, and then be able to bill back the services on a timely and accurate basis. So cloud is great, we're moving forward at a really rapid clip, but it does require some new thinking in terms of how do you actually manage a cloud service, and as you shift from managing physical assets and free up your resources to focus on performance and mission results, how do you manage that business relationship?
Okay, so cloud, mobility, unlocking data. You all, and many here in the room, are the heads of organizations of IT professionals and that work with companies that are serving IT professionals. And your own enterprise plays a major part in how the larger enterprise that you serve as CIOs implements these technologies. If you could share one or two organizational or process or even skill types of changes or considerations that you're going through that might be relevant to the audience today, in terms of taking advantage and leveraging these technology changes, what are some thoughts that you might have on how you're retooling your own office to move into this modern era that we're hearing about? Let me start with Chuck, since Kathy talked last, and then I'll come back and then go back to Kathy again.
Sure. I think I referred to it a little bit in terms of looking at the services that we provide and figuring out what things do we do well, what things are uniquely our core business, and what things are not. Like email, for example. There are certain things that a service provider can probably do better than we can. And why build it or do it when somebody else can do it better for you? So really looking at, in the era of declining budgets and resources, what are the things that if we had to focus on that only we could do, and what things could we move outside to let somebody else do it for us, securely of course, to make sure that you can keep up with the demand, because it's not possible to do it all yourself. At least I don't think it is, and I'm sure a lot of folks would probably agree with that. The other thing is getting executive buy-in from the top down. I can have all the great ideas in the world, but unless it connects with a business need in the agency, it's not going to go anywhere. It might be the greatest technology ever, but if nobody sees a value in how it's going to bring in new business or drive business, they're not going to care. So obviously getting that executive buy-in from the top and getting them to agree with the dream, the vision of executing that goes a long way.
Great, thanks. Mike, any thoughts?
Yeah, Kathy mentioned it earlier, but governance is so key. In the world of declining budgets and the need to do more with less, or maybe sometimes do less with less, it's important that what you pick to do, you do well, and you do it most effectively. And at least in the National Archives, a governance structure was something that was sorely missing and needed. And from an IT perspective, it really started with what Chuck was saying, getting an understanding from the top of the agency of what was expected, and then using a governance structure to ensure that the strategy is aligned with the type of technologies that you would employ, driving all the way back into what the customer or business needs were. Within the National Archives, just by trying to establish some basic governance types of structures, we've been able to stand up an architecture review board so that we can find technologies that already exist within our inventory of technologies to solve problems. There's a number of projects that have come up that we already had technology to employ without having to really buy anything. It was more of a configure and launch. A huge win. Then after an architecture review, we've created an investment review type of activity where the key initiatives are reviewed with senior management. That helps do a parity check to ensure that the things that they're interested in are indeed those that are starting to kind of come up through the process of business needs into an architecture review and then eventually into an investment process. Those types of things, as simple as they sound, have a tremendous impact on efficiency.
Great. Arjun?
Well, I'd like to echo what my colleagues have said. It's really about the governance aspect of it. And for DHS specifically, it's about setting primary portfolios. We've got 13 portfolios, and some of those are what we would consider to be services portfolios, like back office, finance, HR, and IT services, but others are in the mission space, like securing and screening and domain awareness, things of that nature. And when you operate in that kind of a paradigm, you can start to see where you have duplication and inefficiencies, so you can squeeze that out of the system. And also working with your mission CIOs to identify what goes above the line versus what comes below the line. And what I mean by that is we have planning sessions where we look at those types of infrastructure services, email, SharePoint, infrastructure as a service, dev test as a service, things that could be provided in the commodity IT bent that could be handed off to service providers. And the strategy we're taking is we're trying to move our people up the stack. For want of a better term, just like you move technology up the stack, we're trying to move our folks up the stack, where they're spending more of their time on the actual application development, both in the mobile world and in the agile world, tied back to mission capability, which is where they have their expertise, because they live in that world every day, and not have them tied back to having to deliver routers, servers, et cetera. So if we can get the commodity IT packaged up, if we can offer that as a service, if we can do that more efficiently and effectively, lower the budget that we spend upon those items, and then spend our time on the innovative approaches, like agile development, like building mobile apps, like putting together a unified platform and environment like the one we're working on with GSA right now, where people can actually have a sandbox to develop those mobile apps, to use that open data, to do it with a bent toward being able to test it in an environment that has all those security controls that I was talking about, to test it against those security controls and to test it against 508, and to also open data that we can to the general public so that they can develop apps off of that. One of the indications is, like in Hurricane Sandy, one of the biggest issues that we had was people being able to find gasoline. And we worked with DOE, and we developed a mashup of information from both our archives and also from DOE. And we developed a small mobile app that could be put out to the citizens that would tell them where they could find open gas stations with gasoline supplies in the areas hit by Hurricane Sandy. Those are the kinds of innovative delivery types of mission space quality capability that we want to spend our time doing.
Great. Kathy, before I go to you, I'm going to, in a moment, just to see if there are questions here. I'm going to squint a little bit because the lights are a little loud, so when you do raise your hand, please raise it high and jump if we don't see you. But let's just give Kathy one more chance. And also, Kathy, if you could expand the question a little bit, because of GSA's role as a service provider, not just steps that you might be taking internally, but also how you are looking at opportunities for other entities, including states, to use GSA's vehicles, for example, to purchase more effectively and efficiency.
Sure. So there are really sort of two flavors of areas in which states can really participate in some of the things we're doing at the federal level. So with some, like for instance, FedRAMP. FedRAMP, for those of you who don't know, is a new program to authorize and assess cloud security across government. And the concept is do it once and then leverage it many, many times. So we've established a baseline set of security standards, a very consistent, robust process with templates and accredited vendors to do the assessments. New kind of an authorization called a provisional authorization, which is granted by Margie, her counterpart at DoD, and GSA's CIO, to be able to essentially attest that a cloud vendor's controls and system meet those minimum standards and have been successfully validated by an accredited third-party organization. Those provisional authorizations can then be leveraged across government, as can authorizations that are granted at an agency level and meet FedRAMP standards. We're also instituting continuous monitoring, which gives us real-time assurance. So that combination of rigor, trust, consistent baselines, and very rigorous reviews results in a level of trust that will enable these authorizations to be reused across government many times. So that's a great example of a program at the federal level that while states can't tap in and authorize vendors off of our FedRAMP program, you can lift and shift every ounce that has gone into this program and tailor it to state needs. We've got templates that can easily be plagiarized. We have...
it's all public domain.
It's all public
Processes,
domain.
Procedures.
Yeah, templates, everything, and it's all on our fedramp.gov website. So that's a good example of a program that while you may not participate in it, you can certainly take advantage of it. There are other shared solutions that are offered at a GSA-wide level that you can directly participate, and I'll just mention three. One is our USA search engine, which is a no-cost, very robust search engine that 8 states are using right now. In fact, South Carolina just launched search yesterday, which we were really delighted by. DHS uses it. I'm not sure about your organizations, but it's free to states. It's optimized for state use, or for government use, and it delivers extremely rapid, very, very accurate results. And again, that's something that you can just pick up and use. It's pretty easy to implement, and it's no cost, which is always good these days. But the primary offerings from GSA are really our acquisition vehicles. So there are 2 sets of pre-negotiated contracts called GSA schedules that are available under a cooperative purchasing program for states to use. One is the GSA Schedule 70, which is IT products and services. It includes software, hardware, professional services, equipment, cloud services, virtually anything a CIO would be looking for, and you and your subsidiary organizations can buy directly off of those schedules. Similarly, we have a schedule called Schedule 84. I don't know why these things have come to be known by their numbers, but in fact they have. And that is for security equipment and services. And I'd particularly like to point out its applicability to some of the Safer Schools or initiatives that are being implemented across many states. There are alarm systems, surveillance systems, all kinds of equipment that is used for security and for law enforcement that are applicable to many of the initiatives that you are concerned about today.
Thanks, Kathy. All right, I did see the first jumper up and downer right here, so we'll go here and then we'll go around the room. Please. And introduce yourself to our panel if you would. If you'd introduce yourself, that'd be great. I'll repeat the question if I don't think there's a mic in the room, so I'll repeat it. Oh, here we go.
There you go. Can you all hear me okay? All right. My name is Jay Wyant, and I have a wonderful title. It's Child. Chief Information Accessibility Officer and for the state of Minnesota. And so I've been doing this for about a year. I'm new to government as well as to the job. And I appreciate you all mentioning Section 508, but also several of you mentioned accessibility, but you all usually that in the terms of getting to the information rather than the information itself be accessible. So what I'd like to ask you all is, I see now at the time as an opportunity that you're reshaping how IT works. How can you in your position use this opportunity to make accessibility part of the solution rather than a problem? Because a lot of people look at it as a problem, or they don't know enough about it, so they want to avoid it. So what can you do to help make it actually a solution, a vehicle to better success, rather than part of the problem for both federal and state government?
So while the panel's thinking about it, that's a great question. And while I was at OMB, I had the good fortune of being the first chair of the federal Section 508 steering committee. So we were thinking very early about the type of questions that you're asking about. And one of the things that we found sort of is consistent with your question, which is that services that are responsive to this line of inquiry actually service a much broader audience of users across students, different demographic populations, et cetera. So let me open it up to the panel to speak to
Dan,
that.
I totally agree. If you make information accessible, it's not only accessible to people with disabilities, it's accessible to people who are older and may not have the eyesight of a younger person. It just makes it much more universally available. So one of the things that we're doing under the digital strategy is really trying to differentiate between the data layer or the content layer and the presentation layer. And if you do that and you make data accessible in machine readable form, then when you go to address the presentation layer, it's much easier to make it accessible. And so we're really trying to get people to focus on getting at the underlying content and data in a way that it is accessible and in a way that makes it most reusable for everyone.
Sure. Within DHS, and I mentioned that, that we have these platforms that we're developing where 508 is a part of that equation. The accessibility requirements are baked into our enterprise architecture. They're a part of all our architecture reviews. We have an accessibility officer within my office, the Office of the Chief Information Officer, and not only, his name is Bill Peterson, and not only is he working to make those processes available to every component within DHS, but he's also working at the federal level. He has something that he's developed called a Trusted Tester program, and what that basically encompasses is he's got a set of individuals that test each application for its accessibility for each kind of disability. And given that, he not only gives feedback to the developers within our application world, the people who are trying to develop our applications, but he also gives feedback to vendors. So major products that are coming forward in Microsoft land and others that have big names, he deals with them on a regular basis. He's taken this, this program to the Federal CIO Council, and Mr. Van Rokel, as our federal CIO, just recently blessed it and wants to implement it as a best practice across government. We're doing that through the Best Practices Committee of the Federal CIO Council.
And Margie, just to add to that, the other thing that we're doing with that, we also have a usability testing program that tests websites across government for usability and customer experience, including 508 access. And we're also helping bridge the CIOs with the federal web managers, because it's really not just the CIOs who have responsibility for making sure that the information is accessible, but it's also the web managers.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing I guess I would like to add to that is, it's just to reiterate what has been said, but the accessibility needs need to be understood at the beginning.
Absolutely.
So that they don't become a problem at the end. So it gets back into good planning, a good understanding that the 508 is a part of your enterprise architecture, and it's early in the process so that you can actually plan for it, and it makes it go much better.
Other questions? Okay, while you're thinking, security. So we've talked about security in various forms today, and a lot of people and a lot of technology organizations, when they go to the program office looks at them and says, security, oh, you're just trying to shut down my application, make it more difficult. What are some steps you've taken, especially from an enterprise security perspective, which more often is where the CIO has direct authority, to help program offices understand security as an enabler instead of an impediment? And how do you sort of go about that conversation? And I'll open it up to anybody to.
Do you want me to start?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. This world is changing. It's changing very dramatically. The threats have increased and they've changed. And we, as CIOs and IT professionals, have to be aware of how that has shifted and have to be prepared to mitigate those threats. So one of the things that you're seeing is there are several cyber bills that have come to the fore, that some of them in various stages of discussion. And we're moving from what we used to do, which was the certification and accreditation of an application once every 3 years, and then you really weren't checking in along the way. A lot of paper, a lot of testing at that one point in time. What we're moving to is something we call continuous diagnostics and mitigation, which is what the federal government calls it. But also there's a concept within this called continuous authorization, which means that you constantly monitor your environment. You constantly monitor your application space. You constantly monitor your network. And you have certain processes and procedures and types of individuals and skill sets in place so that you can recognize those threats, so you can isolate them, so you can remove them from your environment, but maybe not completely relieve them from the environment, so that you can actually follow the threat and follow the trail of the perpetrator. These are the kinds of things that we're doing today. We're also working very effectively with the 17 critical infrastructure sectors. And in your states, I'm sure this is a very hot topic for you in terms of banking, water supply, utilities. Everything is governed by technology today. And the threats against the very way of life that we participate in on a daily basis from those cyber threats is very real. So we have to be cognizant of that. We have to constantly exchange information. And I think you see through the NPPD organization that exists within DHS, they have the primary responsibility to do that in the .gov space, but also working with the states and with industry to define what they see in the landscape, to share that information, and to jointly try to address and mitigate those threats. And that's a really important shift in mindset that I've seen over the last couple of years.
Margie, are there particular committees or points of interface that you think would be most important for the states to follow, be aware of, either in DHS or even across the federal enterprise?
Yes, I think that you can watch what's coming out of NPPD in terms of the procurement that they're putting out right now. You can see what's included in terms of the tools and the skill sets and the processes that they're trying to offer to the community. And if you look across that landscape, you can see how we're trying to address those problems. There's that procurement that's going to be federal-wide. There has been money in the federal budget supplied to NPPD in order for them to supply those tools and services to the agency population. But you can look at what's being offered there and you can see the approach. You can also engage directly with NPPD. They engage directly with states. They have their own relationships, and I won't pretend that I know what all of those are, but we engage with them as the protector of DHS systems and data. They engage with the states and with industry as in sharing information and giving them tools and capabilities that can help fight this cyber war. MPPD has some specific points of entry, and I can certainly get that back to the NASCIO team here and have it published to the population that's here today.
Great. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I have, I guess, one thought, just to tag onto that a bit. And one of the things that I see in a mid-sized, small agency like the National Archives, what's really important to us, and from a security perspective, is a state of readiness. It goes back to the planning. The work that's done by DHS is wonderful in helping us understand when threats are coming in, but making sure that within the staff and the contractor support of roles and responsibilities and what we do in case of a certain situation is really very important, because you have to react fast and know who's responsible for what. If you delay too long, you lose valuable time. So preparedness is a key, I think, in security as well.
And just to piggyback on that too, to move away from the paper dragon of CNA documentation and more the continuous monitoring, I think is key. GPO is a relatively small agency, so we try to right-size the level of security based on the risk and try not to overwhelm the program with all of these requirements that they have to do, and tailor it instead towards the level of risk that the application might have, and then monitor very closely. And the last thing is just a sort of a practical piece of advice is, I think it was Reagan that said, never let a good crisis go to waste. Whenever you have anything that's close to a security incident, make sure that you capitalize on that and show the powers that be that this is why security is so important, because it can be sort of a nebulous concept when you're talking about CNA until you actually relate it back to an actual incident where something happened that could have been prevented, or where security came in and actually helped lock something down.
So also, I'll just mention one thing. I'll put on my hat as the chair of the DHS Cybersecurity Advisory Subcommittee, working with the National Policy and Programs Directorate that Margie mentioned, and also outgoing with the Information Security and Privacy Advisory Board, which is the federal government's overall security advisory committee that's run by NIST. And under the President's Cybersecurity Executive Order, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, is actually running now a nationwide, very open process to develop a cybersecurity framework. And many of you may have been plugged into this process, but if you haven't, or your staffs that are working in this area have not yet been, you should look at the NIST website to find out how to get involved, because it's a very open, interactive process. NIST is really is in the information gathering stage at this point, and has said publicly, I was at the rollout event for them a couple of weeks ago, that they want to hear from everybody who's affected, and especially from other governmental partners in whom the cybersecurity enterprise is really a shared enterprise, with so many programs being delivered from the federal government through to the states to the citizens and beneficiaries. Other questions?
Dan, you've got one over.
There's one here. Great. Okay, sorry. I told you the lights are.
Dugan Petty, the Governing Institute. Kathy, you talked about the GSA offerings, and I think that's really great for you to talk about those, because I think states look at those and they're terrific options for us. One thing you didn't mention was apps.gov, and apps.gov was something that I thought was really terrific, and the way it laid out, it was easy to access, and it allowed for state and local governments to pretty quickly see if those contracts were available to them. I know that's gone, and it's sort of been replaced with, I guess, information.apps, but do you see bringing that type of application menu back to for availability with state and local governments?
Yeah, one thing to keep in mind is that all of the information that was available on that site is available other places. So in the name of efficiency, we're really trying to direct traffic toward our fedramp.gov site, which has a lot of that information, and then the sites over in our Federal Acquisition Service that provide information about the email as a service and infrastructure as a service BPAs, and all of the other vehicles that you can go to directly. The other thing that we're doing is that we'll be beefing up, apps.gov was really a cloud computing site that was named in a way that made it hard to realize that that's in fact what it was. We'll also be enhancing and expanding the mobile apps gallery on USA.gov, which will give you a place to come one place to come and see what are the really wonderful mobile apps that have been developed across government to help citizens meet their needs and help deliver services to citizens. So look to some enhancement there.
Okay, any other questions? Yep, in the back.
Hi, Daryl Ackley, CIO with the state of New Mexico. One of the things that we're starting to flirt with there is the use of cross-departmental longitudinal data, if you will, especially with respect to higher, public education, higher education, our Department of Labor. And this panel seems almost custom tailored for some of those issues because what we're running into are the obstacles can very easily be things like retention policies associated with the different data, or who has ownership of that information from a public record once it's aggregated into these various reports, and how can we make that useful, or if there's security considerations. And so I was just wondering if the panel could comment on some of those aspects of kind of data fusion when you move into more of that multiple constituent databases mode.
Sure, and of course privacy issues as well.
Sure.
Mike, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I would. I think from your question is perfect, because as for the federal government to move forward in our massive electronic records challenges, collaboration is absolutely key, and having an understanding of what the data standards are, et cetera, are a requirement in order to get the data to move effectively through its life cycle. But also the understanding from who owns the record and the record schedules. That's one of the key things that the archivist community really works on with agencies. And at the state level as well, the archives and the librarians also look at the ownership perspective of who has responsibility for the records. But I think the key of it is, and the success is going to be in collaboration. I've been participating at the state level with something called the State Electronic Records Initiative as a part of the Council of State Archivists. And one of the aspects that they are clearly recognizing is that collaboration within the state is critical, but even collaboration among states for large enterprise types of solutions. So I think the more that we can get into a collaborative type of spirit and mode, it would be a way to really yield good results.
And if I can expand on that, one of the things that we're doing with data.gov is really expanding and reinvigorating some of the communities that have been established around common domain areas. So we have communities, states, cities, and counties community that has very rich data sets from both state, county, and city level. But we also have communities that cut across organizational boundaries in education, in health, in environment, in a whole host of areas that allow for exactly that kind of collaboration, and have a space through wikis and other forums where those kinds of questions can be answered not only within, say, a state, but across states and with others who are struggling with some of those same areas. So again, the purpose is to really bring visibility and collaboration around how do you take that data and make it as useful as possible? How do you address the questions that come up in using that data? And whether those are privacy or security or records management, or how does it relate to other available data sets? The intent is to really unleash all that data and get it in the hands of folks who can solve those problems in a collaborative fashion.
Mm-hmm. And I know that the Office of Management and Budget now has a new initiative where they're looking at existing longitudinal administrative data sets and how agencies can work with those and piece those together. So they're going to be working more with the agencies, certainly at the federal level and the state level as well. The timer is telling us that the stage will self-destruct in 5 seconds.
It's flashing.
That's right. So unless there are any final questions, I'd like to just go down the line and just ask if you have any closing thoughts in terms of things you'd like to leave the guests with, Margie?
I would like to leave the guests with the opportunity to continue the dialogue. We have several things that we're struggling with at the federal level that are the same things that you're struggling with on a daily basis at the state level. And to whatever extent we can share best practices, or to what Kathy talked about at the very beginning, areas where we've solved problems or we've put in processes or we've developed templates, these should be just open kimono and everybody can come and share in these. These are the types of exchanges that I would like to continue, because I know that we're all trying to solve the same things. If we can do that once and then have everybody share in that, I think it would move us forward much more rapidly.
Mike?
The thing I would like to leave with the gang here is the spirit of collaboration. I'll give you an excellent example on collaboration that was unbelievable. About a year ago, the National Archives released the 1940 census. And it was the first time in history that the the census was released only electronically. So it was one day, it was rather exciting in the IT world dealing with the traffic. But the collaboration example is crowdsourcing. We worked with the genealogy community and made the information available, which were images of the census. And the community started to work on a crowdsourcing perspective of actually typing in the name index of the 1940 census. It was expected that it was going to take a year to create the index so you could go and find your relatives in 1940. It was completed by July of last year. So in only 3 months, the entire 1940 census was name indexed and triple checked for accuracy. The power of collaboration is incredible, and I think that is the key to success.
I really, just to add to that, collaboration is key. I venture to say the things we're dealing with are the same things that you're dealing with. I think of when I came to GPO from USDA Food Safety, some reporter asked me if I knew anything about printing when I came to GPO. I said, no, I didn't know anything about cow slaughter when I was at USDA, but IT is generally IT. So the same things you're experiencing, we are too, and I'd like to see that dialogue be as wide open as possible from both sides, us to you and you to us.
Kathy?
I couldn't agree more. The only thing I'd add to that is, we're all, my office is very focused on citizen-facing government services. So let's also keep in mind, how do we really improve that customer experience of the citizens we serve? There are many models across federal government, state government, local government. Some of the things that we're working on, we're working on a new portal for citizens to engage with government called MyUSA. And we really need that collaborative feedback to understand how to best deliver these services and design these systems so that they really optimize the experience that our citizens have when they come to us for services. And most of the time, they're really not sure whether they should be at the state level, the federal level. They don't know how to navigate the labyrinth of bureaucracy at any level, and would really appreciate a very high satisfaction, highly effective customer experience. So let's keep talking about that as well.
Great. Well, please join me in giving our panel a hand. Thank you all for your questions, and we hope that you'll have a terrific day tomorrow and a terrific conference.
I'm going to have you just stay right there, and we'll finish this up real quick. Thank you, Margie, Michael, Chuck, Kathy, and Dan. We appreciate it. I think we learned a lot here. I want to do another ARS question just because I can. This question's for state government only. Do you currently use GSA Schedule 70 for procuring IT goods and services? A is yes, B is no, C, my state prohibits using GSA Schedule 70, or D, I don't know.
No, but I'm delighted to hear the answer.
Wow, 38% say no, and 33 say yes. So, and 20 say it's prohibited, so that's interesting. Just goes to show we're the same, but we're different. I want to remind you, please, please, please go and make your donation for Bite Back one more time. The table's going to be open as you're leaving here, so the deadline for registration is tonight. For those of you participating in the Power Walk, we'll be meeting in Congressional Senate at 6:15 tomorrow morning, so don't miss out. Unless it's raining, then just find Karen Robinson and give her more money. And all state members, Pinnacle and Gold sponsors, please meet in the lobby at 5:45 for the premier reception this evening. Don't forget your evaluations. I promised I would remind you about that. And with that, we will see you all tomorrow morning. Thank you very much.